Last year, something happened that sparked more discussion than even the company AK Interactive using the Holocaust to market their art book, which, yes, actually did happen. This event was a document leak in September of 2021 from the largest wargaming company, Games Workshop. Now, the document was an NDA, or a non-disclosure agreement, which was leaked on Reddit that, according to the original post, was sent to content creators, much like myself, only creators that would be doing early reviews for Games Workshop products instead of reviews for 3D printing products like I might do. Now, the community response to this was diverse, to say the least, ranging from, this is boilerplate NDA, what's the big deal, to, yeah, this is really not good. There was even a healthy amount of skepticism from the fake news crowd. Because this NDA was meant for content creators, several content creators were very vocal about it and chimed in all over the internet. And it became really clear that this just wasn't a simple situation. There is a lot to unpack here. And while you may not think it's relevant to you if you are here watching this on YouTube, then it probably does impact you more than you might think. So in this video, we'll be talking about why this NDA is worth discussing, what the community and, yes, actual legal professionals in both the US and the UK have to say about it, and how this impacts you as a hobby enthusiast. And while this specific NDA that we'll reference throughout this video is from Games Workshop, the company isn't really the focus here. It's the context that really makes the situation unique, yet still relevant to many other companies who also work with content creators to get their own products reviewed. It's why I, as a 3D printing channel, decided to cover this topic. Yes, it can even impact the 3D printing space as well, because we do reviews too. Let me start by saying that I'm not a lawyer and this isn't legal advice. It's often speculative and just my opinion. That being said, this video isn't meant to be a super in-depth analysis of the NDA, but to talk about why it's dangerous and why you should care. We do still need to talk a little in depth about it though. So here's the general consensus from those who do have legal backgrounds and have done and shared their own in-depth analysis. Let's start with what I call the pimp my clause, because, yo dog, I heard you like getting early access to GW miniatures. Okay, cool. So keep them secret. And then keep it secret that you gotta keep them secret. And if anyone asks, you gotta keep it secret that you have to keep the secret. Got it? That's right, you can't talk about the NDA at all. Once you sign it, you can't even mention that you talked to GW about this. And if someone asks if you signed the NDA, you basically need to respond, NDA? There is no NDA in Ba Sing Se. Or you can just not respond at all, which is what happens a lot. But it isn't completely banned to bring it up. You still kind of can in a roundabout way. Content creators who do sign it can still share that that content is an ad, that GW sent them product for free or in advance, but they can't disclose their relationship with GW or mention the NDA. Which is why you see amazing miniature painters hashtagging ad and sharing openly that those miniatures were indeed free and sent by Games Workshop. This isn't clear on YouTube though, where seeing that little ad sign at the top of a video can also be a reference to a sponsor, like Rage Shadow Legends, the best mobile RPG you've never heard of. So there's the big issue. How do you know if your favorite content creator is being paid as an influencer, or just sponsored via free product, or an employee on their marketing team, or a contractor making box art? That's the thing. Viewers, followers, and fans just don't know. Assuming that content creators signed the NDA, which you don't know if they did or didn't because they can't talk about it, and even if it wasn't this particular NDA, it might still ban them from talking about it, and suddenly they're sus too. So how can you trust your favorite creator's opinion if you just don't know all of their potential bias? Well, you can't, and suddenly a really important part of the consumer ecosystem, which is honest reviews to help inform consumer decisions and help you decide whether you should buy something, is quelled on social media across the whole internet. It only leaves these biased positive media from people that do get early product. Here's a quick clip by Discourse, who's a legal professional in the UK.
This clause could, in my opinion, have the effect of basically saying, hey, if you try to get other people to play different games in your videos, then we'll come after you. Yikes, that's crazy.
This bias is really important and something we're going to go into more detail later on in the video. Now, in defense of NDAs everywhere, I think it's important to recognize that NDAs exist for a reason, and there's this mutually agreed upon exchange happening. The person signing it does indeed get early access to product and company secrets that they agree not to leak without jeopardizing the success of the company. And in many cases, this is the exact purpose of an NDA. But is this actually happening with those who are signing Games Workshop NDAs? Well, why not hear from a creator themselves who did have an NDA with Games Workshop?
So I'm sure you're wondering, what did I get and what did I learn? Well, the kind of disappointingly short answer is not a lot. So all in all, over the course of a year, I got about £200 of board game expansions and zero information. And I wasn't told about any of the upcoming releases that hadn't already been announced on the community site, despite now being one of the main channels for 40k content on the platform.
In other words, creators who sign this NDA get free stuff, but they don't get any monetary compensation, and they definitely don't get any secrets, and that's about it. This isn't very fair, and here's why. For signing this NDA, a content creator, sure, they get advanced product, like I mentioned, but GW asks them to keep it quiet, not share any details, reviews, pictures until they say so, and that's often on release day, because as you saw in the Midwinter Minis clip, they really aren't told. Games Workshop also gets to hold the power of a legal threat based on what the content creator says or does for up to 3 years after GW sends them product. And if you don't believe that's how this is interpreted, here's a clip from Hoig Law.
The term of this document, as written in black and white on the page here, is perpetual. Or more specifically, it doesn't have a set termination date. Because if you think about it, at any point in time, Games Workshop can just send a minifig or send whatever it is that might otherwise be confidential to the recipient. That starts the 36-month timer over again.
That's right. This NDA is the never-ending contract. As long as GW keeps sending a single mini, a box, anything. Once you're on that list, someone at GW says, your soul is mine. Because in addition to confidentiality, the person who signed the NDA is also agreeing not to criticize, compete, not to draw away business from GW, which could include everything from 3D printable STLs, video content to rival Warhammer Plus, painting tutorials, reviews of non-GW products, and the list can go on because the terms in the NDA are so ambiguous. It's a pretty big legal threat and is so open-ended, it's pretty wild and scary, because who knows what GW could interpret as competition. More on that later as well. Games Workshop holds this legal threat over the content creator for up to 3 years after they send them the product. But you know what? Even if GW took a YouTuber's freedom to say whatever they want to say about GW's products, they'll never take their freedom of YouTube descriptions. God bless Games. God bless. By now you're probably wondering, why don't content creators just not sign the NDA? They absolutely can refuse, and many of the bigger channels won't even touch it because they just don't need to. Which is why you have channels like Squidmar Miniatures making videos about how crappily made the biggest model in all of Warhammer is.
The landing ramp, it's a bit warped, quite a lot warped. I don't know if you guys can see. Big mold line here. But yeah, this is easy to file. The warping is a bit more difficult. Also got like a big dent in it. So that's kind of disappointing, but
smaller channels often do sign this NDA for the chance at early promotion and free models and a chance at triggering YouTube or Twitter's famous algorithm. And that's a pretty appealing trade, right? To some smaller channels, this might feel like validation from a company they love. But they're really taking a risk of being limited in the things they say about GW for up to 3 years. And if they happen to be one of those channels who do make it big and grow really quickly, they now have a lot less options for what kind of content they make without fear of that legal threat I mentioned earlier. Here's another clip from Discourse Miniatures on that very same subject.
Know that small creators will read this clause. They know, in my opinion, what the implication is. You can infer that if you do anything to damage Games Workshop's reputation, that they will have cause to come after you. That is a reasonable inference for someone who is not a lawyer. And if you are a small channel, you will be forced to follow that instruction.
And I know it's hard to take a person dressed in a clown outfit seriously, but like I mentioned earlier, she is really a legal professional in the UK, so take it for what it is. There you go. Now, regardless of whether GW acts on this legal threat, doesn't matter because it's a bias that the audience doesn't get to know because, you guessed it, creators can't talk about the NDA or the terms of it once they sign it. You as an audience can adjust for the bias of, oh, hey, that's a free review product, and you probably already have adjusted to that. But what you, the audience, doesn't know is that bias of the legal threat which GW has hanging over the creator, which is why these hidden NDA terms are so harmful. And I want to be clear here, I don't blame any creator for signing this NDA. I felt the way I described earlier when I was sent my first 3D printer for review. But I didn't need to sign an NDA like the one GW is asking here, or any NDA for that matter. I still have never had to sign any NDA to receive the dozens of printers and product I've received over the years. I'm not saying this to boast, but to illustrate that smaller channels are victims here of predatory terms, even if they didn't or don't realize it when they agree to them. These are terms that bigger channels don't have to follow because lots of times they don't even have to sign the NDAs in order to get that free product. And it's important to me that we recognize this as a community to support all of our up-and-coming creators. But can you imagine if a channel like Midwinter Minis had signed this GW NDA when they were at 5K subs? Wait, didn't Midwinter Minis sign an NDA though? Yes, he did. And he was actually able to break it. And we know it was because it was a different NDA, because in his own words, fortunately, I did not sign a document as insidious as this. At least he is now able to talk about it less than 3 years later. But current NDAers can't do either of those things due to the ambiguous terms. And that threat can be really scary for a channel who does want to speak openly and honestly about products they love and a game that they often care deeply about. It's especially scary because who has the money to even step foot in court with Games Workshop? Who could challenge GW in this NDA even if they wanted? That's a really good question. Now, one of the common defenses of this NDA is that this fear of legal action is overblown and exaggerated. I agree to some extent. I don't think GW is going to send Interpol to raid someone's house for breaking this NDA. But is it really unreasonable to think that channels who happen to land in GW's bad side are completely safe either? I mean, this is the company that took down wildly popular fan-made film series Astartes, that asked Amazon to take down the book Spots the Space Marine, Defense of the Fiddler, constantly issues DMCAs for any 3DSTL tagged Warhammer, and went to court with third-party bits maker Chapterhouse Studios, essentially sending them into bankruptcy. Of course, this company would never take legal action against an individual or company they thought was a threat to them. Of course, provided that channel did become a legitimate threat. Apparently, a legitimate threat like, once again, Midwinter Minis, who suffered a loss of income because of a manual copyright claim against one of his videos criticizing Warhammer Plus. Gee, I wonder why anyone would think that GW would take legal action against the YouTube channels that they felt were doing something they didn't like. But seriously, this concept of a YouTube channel or Twittebrity growing to be a real threat to Games Workshop's a potential problem because of how ambiguously they define competition in this NDA. Here's a clip from Hoiglaw once again.
My red flags are raised because of the language used here. What is a client of GW? What is a customer of GW? Do you have to be buying things from them all the time? Have I purchased a GW good? Have I purchased a GW good if I bought something that is made in the Warhammer universe but was licensed out by GW? And worse, what does it mean for someone to be in the habit of dealing with GW? Because presumably that category of person doesn't fall within what this definition would include under client or customer. So if they aren't a client and they aren't a customer, what does it mean to be in the habit of dealing with them? Whatever that means, they all fall under the definition of capital R, capital C, restricted customer for purposes of this contract. And that should raise a red flag as we go along.
I won't speculate about all of the terms, but let's just talk direct competition to GW's most popular product lines. In the event that a channel signed this NDA decides to make Space Marine painting content, is that in competition with Games Workshop's own miniature painting content available on their YouTube channel and or Warhammer Plus? Is a channel that starts selling 3D STLs of female space soldiers that are for sci-fi games suddenly in competition with Warhammer 40k because it's taking away their customers for their game and miniatures? Is reviewing army painter speed paints, arguably the biggest competitor to Games Workshop's contrast paint line, an aggressive attempt to make GW lose money, or just a simple review? All it takes is for Games Workshop to feel that content creators' content is in competition with their products or content, and they are within their rights of this document to take legal action, like you heard in the snippet earlier in this video. That should be incredibly concerning for any channel interested in monetizing and growing a business through YouTube or any social media platform because, like I said earlier, no small business can afford to battle GW in court without some kind of free support like Chapterhouse Studios got, even if the terms of the NDA are unreasonable and probably going to be shot down. Much less overseas companies who would have to deal with the UK's laws since that is also a stipulation in the NDA. Oh, and you'd have to pay their court fees no matter what too. Just a little icing on the cake there. In short, this feels like a real bully move on Games Workshop. Here's a clip from Discourse once again.
But it's super interesting, and to my mind has probably been drafted in response to content creators like Duncan Rhodes, Kill, Danny from 3D Printing, or Miniac, who have gone on to create their own products and miniature lines. And this seems like Games Workshop want to prevent any future content creators from doing the same. So rather than help uplift the community, I would speculate that Games Workshop seem to want to stop this proliferation of independent lines at the root.
So now that we've explored how the NDA impacts content creators in this space, what about in adjacent hobby spaces like miniature painting or terrain building or other tabletop games, or even mine, 3D printing? After all, every hobby channel I know now has 3D printers and does, or at least has done, 3D printing of some sort on their channel. We know one thing: companies pay attention to their competitors and other companies in their space, and they follow suit all the time. This NDA is now public, and the fact that creators are signing it 5 months after it leaked means that creators are willing to accept these terms, even with the detrimental consequences and erosion of trust that it can lead to in the eyes of the viewers who want objective and honest reviews of products. So why wouldn't other hobby companies try and get smaller creators to do the same with their own NDAs? If you feel that this is a slippery slope, likely won't happen, it's already happened. Remember that NDA that guy from Midwinter Minis signed? It was a different one than the one they're sending out now. Like we talked about earlier, this is real proof that Games Workshop and potentially other companies are willing to push the envelope and make the terms even more insidious as he described it. And it isn't a stretch to say other companies in our hobby would be willing to do the same. Now, when this NDA was first leaked, one of the common responses was that gaming industry NDAs were stricter for things like alpha and beta tests, so why worry about this particular NDA? Well, if we know it wasn't as strict recently, why would we as a community be okay with this new hyper-restrictive language being added and normalized into our content creator sphere? And why are we okay with such ambiguous terms of competition and criticism potentially starting to spread to other companies in the hobby? What if hobby creators sign this kind of NDA with other companies in our space? We couldn't discuss real situations like the DMCA takedowns and copyright strikes Green Stuff World issued to Sword and Steel for testing their color shift line of paints in 2020, or for hobby channels condemning AK Interactive, one of the most popular weathering powder companies in the hobby, for capitalizing off genocide like the Holocaust for a provocative art book release. These were real incidents, and we have no idea what kind of situations could arise in 1, 2, or 3 years. Just ask yourself, would you really want your favorite hobby creators to be silenced because of having signed an NDA like this from not just Games Workshop, but any other company in this space? Now, some of you might feel that the strictness of the NDA is a necessary thing to protect the company's livelihood. That is true, but the level of strictness and ambiguous terms of this NDA isn't appropriate to what content creators have access to. An example is in the 3D printing space, where early access and beta 3D printers are very frequently sent to content creators for review, in a very similar exchange as Games Workshop with their list of content creator reviewers. Now, even in the 3D printing world, where literal closed source hardware, firmware, and software that hasn't even been brought to market or is still on Kickstarter is sent to reviewers, an NDA of this kind is rare. I asked on Twitter for 3D printing content creators to share if they'd signed an NDA before, and of 40 creators, 70% had never signed an NDA, but 18% had, and almost all of them were for provisions about sending printers back due to their cost, which I think is reasonable due to the nature of the reviews. This just goes to show that an excessive NDA isn't always necessary, even in industries where there's higher risk for exposure, like the 3D printing space. And GW's strict NDA practices are really corporate preference and not de facto need and standard in our hobby content. But that still doesn't stop companies from trying to implement predatory practices, even with the largest channels in the hobby space. So please don't take this the wrong way. Predatory practice exists in every space, but they should be fought and not accepted if we want them to change. And while I understand legal documents change based on developing situations and circumstances, I don't feel the changes made to this NDA were necessary, and that's only the changes we know of due to the NDA leak in the first place. One of the big questions we still need to answer, though, is this NDA boilerplate, meaning a pretty standard one? Here's Discourse once again.
Oh, and also for some of the commenters out there, I don't care what a standard NDA in your industry looks like. This document isn't anything like a standard NDA for review product.
The keyword there is for a reviewer. If this NDA was just for employees, I wouldn't be making this video, but it's not. It's for passionate content creators who are spending hours making videos trying to give other fans honest reviews to help them decide whether they should purchase something with their own hard-earned money. And this NDA is predatory and effectively stomps the possibility of honest reviews and healthy adjacent competition as you would a small fire your child made from a matchbook left on the counter. Not that I'm speaking from experience here, but in Games Workshop's most recent half-yearly report, they write, "Our customers really enjoy user-generated content, and as such we are committed to supporting fans as they create their own Warhammer-related events, videos, articles, podcasts, etc. Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Roundtree, and sometimes championing a hobby includes healthy criticism and feedback, one which your company's NDA doesn't freely allow. Please, consider all of the creators next time you send out your NDA, and consider the implications your company's actions have on all adjacent hobbies, not just the Warhammer hobby. We are all connected after all." Thanks for watching. You know all the things. Like, subscribe, Patreon, and so on. Happy printing and happy gaming. The never-ending contract. Yeah!